Imagine hitting send on $1 million invoice to your biggest international client.
Which is stressful enough on its own.
Right. But imagine that before that email even lands in their inbox, a government algorithm has already intercepted the file.
Yeah, just jump right in the middle of it.
Exactly. It intercepts it, scans the underlying data, validates the tax calculations, and then registers your legal liability on a federal server. And all of that happens in about 200 milliseconds.
200 milliseconds, it's almost impossible to even conceptualize that kind of speed.
It really is. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are looking at a really fascinating stack of sources that suggest the traditional world of business finance is, well, it's effectively over.
Yeah, completely obsolete.
We have an in-depth article titled The CFO of 2030, Why Real-Time Intelligence is Rewriting the Leadership Mandate. And we're looking at that alongside a pretty provocative blog post called The CFO is Being Replaced. Just not by who you think.
And the premise here is just a fundamental rewiring of corporate leadership. I mean, these sources, they aren't talking about a routine software update or, a minor shift in reporting structure.
Right, it's way bigger than that.
Absolutely. They are detailing how the sheer, just unprecedented velocity of data is breaking old operating models and, well, creating something entirely new.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because our mission today is to really understand how that data velocity is changing what it means to lead a business.
Yeah.
We are moving from this environment where data was something you manually gathered periodically to an environment where data is basically a continuous living pulse.
And the stakes are incredibly high here. We are looking at the most profound transformation of the chief financial officer role in, I'd say, 2 decades.
Wow,
Easily.
Yeah.
And the twist is that this evolution isn't being driven by internal corporate ambition or a sudden change in market cycles. It is happening because the speed at which financial information moves globally has simply outgrown human processing capacity.
We just can't keep up. So whether you are a finance professional prepping for your next big strategy meeting, or maybe a tech enthusiast watching AI reshape the workforce, or, just insanely curious about how automated global business is actually going to function in a few years, this deep dive is going to give you a critical aha moment about the future.
It really is a blueprint for the future of business intelligence.
It is, but to really grasp where we are going, we need to first understand the operating model that is actively dying out right now.
Yeah.
The sources obviously call this the rearview mirror era of finance.
Which is a great name for it. If you think about the historical context for a moment, for most of corporate history, a CFO was essentially a guardian of accuracy.
Right, the person making sure the math checks out.
Exactly. Their primary job was to gather paper trails, reconcile physical ledgers, validate the math, and then just report it. It was a highly manual, entirely retrospective process.
Right. And then we get to the early 2000s. The Enron scandal hits. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act is passed in the U.S., and suddenly the job completely changes.
Right, the stakes get personal.
Yeah. The CFO becomes this compliance steward.
Yeah.
They are suddenly personally, legally liable for the accuracy of their financial reports. They essentially become the institutional guardians keeping the CEO out of jail.
Yeah, which is a massive shift in pressure. And following that, we see the rise of cloud ERP systems, these massive digital workspaces where companies moved away from physical servers in a basement and started sharing integrated software across departments.
Right. Everything gets connected.
Exactly. And when that happened, the expectation shifted again. The CFO was suddenly supposed to be a strategic partner. They were expected to conduct forward-looking analysis and scenario modeling for the board.
But, reading through the sources, there is a massive glaring flaw in all three of those historical eras.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether they were accuracy guardians or compliance stewards or strategic partners, their entire rhythm was completely dictated by the period close.
Yes, the dreaded period close.
Right. The monthly close, the quarterly earnings report, the annual audit. They were operating in a world where financial truth was something you discovered periodically, like weeks after the events actually happened.
Yeah, they were looking backward to try and look forward. Every single decision was based on stale information.
It's like trying to navigate a massive cargo ship by only looking at the wake you leave behind instead of, using the radar to see what's actually in front of you.
That is the perfect analogy. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, if you are listening to this and you lead a team, even if it's outside of finance, think about how much of your week is spent just gathering status updates versus actually acting on them.
Oh, so much time.
Right. Operating on a period close means you are constantly waiting for the dust to settle. But the catalyst forcing companies to abandon this retroactive model, it isn't coming from visionary CEOs.
No, it's not.
It's an external mandate. It's real-time tax compliance.
Right. So the technical term used in the sources is continuous transaction controls, or CTCs.
Yes, CTCs.
And governments across more than 60 countries are currently mandating that invoices must be validated by the tax authority in real time before they can even be exchanged between businesses.
Which is just a staggering level of government involvement if you're used to the old way.
The mechanics of it are totally mind-bending. The article specifically details Saudi Arabia's ZATCA system, Italy's SDI, and Poland's KSEF. So let's make this tangible for a second.
Let's do it.
If you are a manufacturing company operating in Poland under the KSEF mandate, you don't just email a PDF invoice to your buyer anymore. That's over.
No, the workflow is entirely different now. Your system generates the invoice data and sends it directly to a government portal.
Right.
Then the government's algorithm checks it, approves it, applies a unique cryptographic stamp, and only then is it legally recognized as an invoice that the buyer can even process.
Wow.
The government is essentially injecting itself into the exact middle of every single business transaction.
And doing it in milliseconds.
Right. The fundamental shift here is that a transaction is no longer a document event. You aren't mailing a static piece of paper. The transaction has become a continuous data event.
Yeah, every invoice is just a payload of structured, machine-readable data.
Exactly. In the eyes of the tax authority, the concept of the end of the month ceases to exist. The data must be perfectly correct at the exact moment of creation.
And because human analysts literally cannot review thousands of data lines in the 200 milliseconds the government gives them, companies have, well, they have no choice but to hand the steering wheel over to AI.
They absolutely have to.
But bringing AI into the core financial loop triggers this massive existential panic in the boardroom.
Yeah.
And that blog post we were looking at dives straight into this fear.
Yeah, it addresses the whisper running through corporate hallways right now, which is that autonomous agents are going to replace our CFO.
Right. But I have to offer some skepticism here, though. Because if AI agents are now stepping in to handle the transaction validation and the anomaly detection, the error correction, I mean, what does the CFO actually do?
That's the big question.
Right. If the machine is doing all the math, communicating with the government portal, and handling the compliance, isn't the CFO just becoming a well-paid figurehead at this point, just signing off on the AI's work?
Well, it is a very valid question. And what's fascinating here is how the blog post unpacks why the statement AI is going to replace the CFO is simultaneously right and wrong.
Okay, how so?
Because the role that is being replaced is the data assembler, the compliance overseer. Think about a traditional finance department where a team spends 3 weeks every month manually matching purchase orders to invoices, hunting down discrepancies, building spreadsheets to file tax returns.
Right, all that operational noise.
Exactly. That entire operational function is automated. AI-powered agents absolutely will do that faster, more accurately, and continuously.
So the rearview mirror CFO really is dead.
Completely. But the architect of financial intelligence is not. Designing the systems that generate this real-time insight, governing the behavior of those AI agents, determining the strategic direction of the company based on live data, all of that requires immense human judgment.
Okay, so the sources outline this as the paradox of automation. Greater automation doesn't reduce the CFO's footprint, it actually amplifies their strategic importance.
Yes, beautifully said. By liberating them from the operational friction of gathering and reconciling data, they are forced to operate at a much higher, purely strategic level.
Because they no longer spend 80% of their week trying to assemble the puzzle. The puzzle basically builds itself. Their only job is to look at the completed picture and make high-stakes decisions.
Right. But to survive that transition, the modern finance leader has to develop a completely new skill set. The article lays out 4 distinct capabilities, superpowers essentially, that the CFO of 2030 must master to function in this continuous data environment.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because these definitely aren't skills taught in a traditional accounting curriculum. The first superpower they list is data architecture literacy.
Yeah, and to be clear, this does not mean the CFO needs to learn how to write Python code or become a database engineer.
Good, because I don't think many are signing up for that.
Right. But they absolutely must understand data provenance. They need to understand the plumbing of their own business. Where does a data point originate? How does it flow from a point-of-sale terminal through the inventory system into the general ledger.
So it's about the flow.
Yes. If the CFO does not deeply understand how their data is structured and governed, they cannot trust the intelligence it produces.
Right. And once you understand that plumbing, you have to manage the autonomous systems running through it, which leads us to the second capability, AI governance.
And this one requires a massive mental pivot. Historically, a leader looks at a report and asks, what does this data say? But in a world driven by continuous transaction controls, the core question becomes, how should the autonomous system respond?
Meaning the CFO is actively setting the risk tolerance parameters.
Exactly. You are mapping the logic tree for the machine. For instance, if a vendor invoice comes in 15% higher than the original purchase order, what happens?
Does it pay it? Does it block it?
Right. Does the AI automatically dispute it? Or does it pay it anyway because that specific vendor is critical to a live manufacturing run? Or maybe it freezes the account and flags a human analyst. The CFO has to determine that underlying business logic before the transaction ever happens.
It's proactive, systemic judgment rather than reactive, individual judgment,
Spot on.
which flows perfectly into superpower number 3, real-time risk management. Because if you set those parameters wrong, the pain is instant. The time frame for risk is completely collapsed.
It has. In the retrospective era, risk was something you discovered during an audit. A rejected invoice was a discrepancy you found 3 months later. You paid a fine to the local tax authority, you adjusted the books, and you moved on.
Right. But under these new global mandates, if your system submits flawed data to a government portal, the operational impact hits immediately. It's like touching a hot stove.
That's exactly what it is.
In the old days, a rejected invoice was a reporting discrepancy you found 3 months later. Now, as the text says, a rejected invoice in a CTC-mandated country means a halted delivery or a frozen payment. If a supply truck in Italy is stopped because the digital e-invoice doesn't perfectly match the government's expected tax data, the penalty isn't just a future fine.
No, the penalty is that the truck legally cannot move. Your supply chain halts. Your revenue is frozen instantly because an algorithm flagged an anomaly.
The pain is instant.
That immediacy changes everything. You aren't managing risk reports, you are monitoring live operational signals. And that continuous data stream that keeps your trucks moving is exactly what fuels the fourth superpower, strategic intelligence extraction.
Because if the government requires your data to be perfectly clean and instantly verified just to conduct business, well, you suddenly have a perfectly clean, instantly verified data set to use for your own strategy.
Exactly. A CFO who can harness that continuous stream will operate at a level of commercial intelligence that would look like science fiction to a leader from 20 years ago. We are talking about live visibility into global cash positions.
Like knowing instantly that you have excess capital sitting in a European subsidiary that can be routed to fund a sudden supply chain shortfall in Asia.
Yes.
And doing that without having to take on expensive short-term debt to cover the gap.
Or running dynamic pricing models because you have real-time visibility into the exact fluctuating costs of your global supply chain down to the minute. The possibilities are immense.
They really are.
Yeah.
But to wield any of these 4 superpowers, you need the right foundation. The sources highlight a massive invisible bet that multinational companies are making right now without even realizing it. The quality of a CFO's real-time intelligence is 100% dependent on their underlying data architecture.
Yes, the architecture imperative, and the sources issue a severe warning about this. When a company decides to upgrade the central nervous system of their corporate database, say, undertaking a massive migration to SAP's S/4HANA, or when they implement e-invoicing software to comply with a new mandate in France, they are making a deeply strategic choice.
Wait, I have to stop you there, though. If we're talking about database migrations and software implementations, why wouldn't the CFO just hand this entirely over to the IT department and say, hey, build me a system that works?
That is the big question.
Right. I mean, the chief information officer manages the tech stack. The CFO manages the money. Let IT buy the software that makes the government happy, and the CFO can just read the outputs.
Well, delegating that entirely to IT is the trap. IT departments naturally solve for the immediate technical problem in front of them. If the mandate is, we need to be compliant in France by Q3, IT will go out and buy a local point solution for France. Then next year, when Poland's mandate hits, they buy a different software vendor for Poland.
And then another for Saudi Arabia.
Exactly.
So they basically build a patchwork.
And the consequence of a patchwork is fragmented data. You might be legally compliant in each individual country, but from a strategic standpoint, you are blind. The CFO cannot see the global picture because the regional systems literally don't talk to each other.
Oh, that sounds like a nightmare.
It is. It's like trying to conduct a symphony where the string section sheet music is written in French,
Hmm?
the brass section is reading binary code, and the percussion section is just looking at a painting. They're all making noise, but the conductor can't turn it into a cohesive song because nothing is translated into a universal musical notation.
But isn't building a universal notation kind of a pipe dream? I mean, companies acquire other companies constantly. You inherit decades of legacy systems. Attempting to standardize all global transactional data into one system sounds like a billion-dollar 10-year IT nightmare that never actually crosses the finish line.
It is an immense challenge, there's no denying that, which is precisely why the CFO must lead the vision, not just IT. The CFO has to champion a centralized data orchestration model.
What the text refers to as a single canonical data layer.
Yes. That means putting a translation engine in place so that regardless of whether a transaction happens in Tokyo or Berlin, the core financial data is standardized into one global language before it enters the central database. You accept the friction of building that layer up front so that on the back end, you get unified, comparable, queryable intelligence.
I want to highlight a crucial quote from the sources that perfectly captures the reality of building that foundational layer. It says, "The constraint will no longer be data availability. It will be the human capacity to ask the right questions of the data."
It completely flips the business paradigm. For the last century, the limiting factor for any leader was gathering the information. The effort was in the acquisition. In the landscape of 2030, you will have all the information. It will be verified, standardized, and instant.
Right.
The bottleneck is no longer the spreadsheet. The bottleneck is human imagination.
So what does this all mean for us? If we zoom out and look at the whole picture, we're essentially witnessing the death of the period close. That entire corporate ritual of looking backward at the end of the month to figure out what happened is just over.
It's done.
We're seeing the birth of continuous, verified financial intelligence. The leaders who thrive in this new era are going to stop asking what happened last month and start asking what is happening right now and what does it tell us about our next decision.
Which brings us to the ultimate question posed by the text. It's something everyone listening should really ponder regarding their own industry. What would you do differently if you had a continuous real-time view of your entire operation? If you didn't have to wait weeks for a retrospective report, what bold structural decisions could you make today?
That is the question. It leaves me with this final thought, building on what you just said about human imagination. If every major multinational company eventually adopts these real-time AI architectures, which they will absolutely have to do just to stay legally compliant with all these global tax mandates, then having perfect real-time financial data won't actually be a competitive advantage anymore.
No, it won't.
It will just be table stakes. Every company will have it. So the ultimate winners of 2030 won't be the ones with the fastest data. The winners will be the ones with the boldest human intuition.
Absolutely.
The leaders who can look at a continuous stream of global information and act on the tiny, nuanced behavioral anomalies that the AI can flag, but only a human mind can truly understand and strategize around. The radar is going to show every company the exact same ocean. The advantage goes entirely to the captain who knows how to navigate it.
That's a powerful way to look at it.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take a look at your own industry's data velocity with fresh eyes this week, and we'll see you next time.